I opened the door to my house and slipped off my shoes like I always do, feeling the familiar relief of the cool floor under my tired feet. It had been a long day at the market buying groceries for the dinner I planned to make for David and Sarah. After 6 months of them living with me, I knew their tastes, their habits, their schedules. Or at least I thought I did. When I walked into the living room, my daughter-in-law Sarah was standing there with her arms crossed, wearing that fake expression I was sick of seeing every day since they moved in. But something was different this time. Her eyes were shining with a malice I had never seen before, or maybe I just never wanted to admit it was there. "Olivia," she said, using that sticky sweet voice she used when she wanted something. But now it sounded different. Colder. More calculating. "We need to talk about something very important." I set the grocery bags on the coffee table, the same table I had bought 20 years ago with the first paycheck I earned cleaning offices. My hands trembled slightly as I let them go, not from the weight, but from the tension in the air. It was so thick you could cut it with a knife. David was sitting on my sofa, the sofa where I had comforted him when his heart was broken for the first time at 16, where we had watched movies together on Sunday afternoons when he was a boy. But now he was avoiding my gaze like I was a stranger, as if 30-odd years of unconditional love had been erased from his memory. "You see, ma'am," Sarah continued walking toward me with calculated steps like a predator stalking its prey. "David and I have been thinking, and we've concluded that this situation, with you just coming and going as you please, it just isn't working for us anymore. This house needs order. It needs structure. It needs respect." I felt my legs tremble slightly, but I kept my back straight. At 71 years old, I had learned that dignity is sometimes the only thing a woman has, and I wasn't about to give mine up so easily. "Respect," I repeated, and my voice sounded firmer than I expected. "Respect in my own home." Sarah laughed, and that sound hit me like an invisible slap. It was a fake, rehearsed laugh full of contempt. "Your house," she said, dragging out the words. "Look around, Olivia. Do you see yourself paying the light bills? Do you see yourself buying the food we eat every day? Do you see yourself keeping this house running?" I looked around my living room, the room where I had raised my 3 children. The walls were painted the soft yellow I had chosen when David was 10 because he said it reminded him of sunshine. On the shelves were photographs of all of us. David graduating from college, his wedding to Sarah. Happy moments that now felt like framed lies. "David is the one who keeps all this running now," Sarah continued, pointing at my son with a theatrical gesture. "He pays the bills, he buys the food, he takes care of all the expenses. So I think he has the right to establish some basic rules for living together." My son finally spoke, but without looking up from his phone, as if the words he was about to say were as normal as discussing the weather. "Mom, what Sarah means is, we need to set some boundaries. You can't just walk in like this without letting us know. It's uncomfortable for us, especially when we're busy." The words landed like ice stones in my stomach. Let him know. "To enter my own house, the house where I raised you, where I changed your diapers, where I took care of you when you had nightmares." "Exactly," Sarah chimed in with a smile that chilled my blood. "A text message, a phone call. It's not too much to ask, is it? After all, ma'am, you don't have permission or the right to enter without notice. This house has new rules now, and you'd better get used to them." I just stood there feeling the world I had built over decades crumble beneath my feet. This was the house where I had mourned the death of my husband Mark, where I had celebrated every one of my children's birthdays, where I had kept every drawing David made in kindergarten. Now they were asking me to ask permission to enter my own memories. "And what if I don't accept those rules?" I asked, although from the look of satisfaction in Sarah's eyes, I already knew the answer. David finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes shattered me more than all the cruel words I could hear. There was no love, no respect, not even nostalgia for everything we had shared. There was only impatience, as if I were an annoying errand he wanted to finish quickly. "Mom, let's be realistic," he said with an exaggerated sigh. "This is all going to be mine anyway. I'm your only son, the natural heir. We're just moving things along a little to make it more comfortable for everyone." "Are you sure about that?" I asked him, and for the first time in months, my voice sounded firm and clear, loaded with an authority I had forgotten I had. "Of course he is," Sarah intervened, moving closer to me with that venomous smile. "David is the one who will inherit this house eventually, so we better start organizing things now. Besides, ma'am, at your age, you should be thinking about moving to a place more appropriate for someone in your condition." That night, while they ate dinner at my table, using the dishes I had bought with my own hands, while they laughed and talked as if I didn't exist, I stayed in my room feeling every fiber of my being slowly transform. It wasn't just sadness I felt or even anger. It was something much deeper and more dangerous. It was the absolute clarity of someone finally seeing the truth after years of refusing to accept it. My name is Olivia. I am 71 years old, and I have just discovered that the two human beings I trusted most in this world have been looking at me as an obstacle to be removed. For 50 years, I dedicated my body and soul to building a home, to raising children with values, to sacrificing every dollar, every dream, every personal desire, so they could have everything I never had. I sold my wedding jewelry to pay for David's college. I mortgaged this house to finance his first business, which failed miserably. I worked double shifts cleaning other people's houses so he could have the church wedding he always dreamed of. And now, after all that, they were asking me to ask permission to enter my own home. But what David and Sarah didn't know that night, what they never bothered to find out while they were planning my humiliation with such coldness, is that a woman my age didn't get this far by being naive. I survived the death of my husband. I raised 3 children alone. I built a life from nothing and navigated half a century of difficulties without ever giving up. And when a woman like me with my experience and my determination decides to fight back, she can be more lethal than any enemy they have ever faced in their comfortable, privileged lives. Little did they know that in less than a week they would find out who really owned this house, who held the real power. And by then, it would be far too late to ask for forgiveness or try to fix the damage they had caused. The war had just begun, but they didn't know it yet. That morning I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my bed, the same bed where I had given birth to David 45 years ago, back when midwives still came to the house and births happened between hand-embroidered sheets. I remembered how I had cried with joy when I held him for the first time, that perfect baby who weighed barely 7 pounds but was already the absolute owner of my heart. How far I was that night from imagining that 4 decades later that same child I had sung lullabies to would be asking me for permission to enter my own house. The pain I felt in my chest wasn't physical. It was something much deeper, as if a piece of my soul had been ripped out without anesthesia. I got up slowly and walked to the dresser where I kept my most precious photographs. There was David at 5 years old in his kindergarten uniform that I had ironed every morning for 2 years. David at 12, proud of his first math award. David at 18, the day he received his acceptance letter to college. I picked up one of the photographs with trembling hands. It was from his college graduation day. I was standing next to him, beaming with pride, wearing the only elegant dress I owned, the same one I had worn to my wedding 20 years earlier because I couldn't afford a new one. I had worked double shifts for 4 years to pay for that degree, cleaning offices late into the night, coming home with chapped hands and a broken back. But it was worth it. Oh, I thought so then. Every dollar I spent, every hour of sleep, I lost every sacrifice I made. It all made sense because I was building my son's future. My David was going to be a professional. He was going to have a better life than mine. He was going to remember his mother with fondness and gratitude. How naive I had been. I remembered when Mark, my husband, got sick with cancer. David was 25 then. He was already a grown man with a stable job at a construction company. But when his father started chemotherapy, when we needed money for the most expensive medications, when the nights became a hell of pain and hopelessness, David always had an excuse not to be there. "Mom, I have too much work," he'd say on the phone. "Mom, Sarah isn't feeling well and I need to take care of her." "Mom, you know I'm not good with these hospital things. It was me who stayed up night after night taking care of Mark. It was me who sold my few savings to buy the medications. It was me who held him in my arms when he took his last breath one cold March morning. While David was on a business trip he couldn't cancel. After the funeral, when the house filled with silence and loneliness, David would show up occasionally for dinner. Sarah accompanied him sometimes, but always with that forced smile that I now recognized as pure phoniness. They talked about their money problems, how the rent on their apartment had gone up, how expenses were suffocating them. "Mom," David had said to me one afternoon exactly 6 months ago, "what would you think if we moved in with you for a while, just until our financial situation improves? Besides, you'd feel less lonely and we could help you with the house expenses." How foolish I had been to believe they actually wanted to help me. How blind I had been not to see that from the very first day Sarah was measuring every corner of my house with her eyes, calculating what would stay and what would disappear when I was gone. The first few months had been relatively calm. They paid some bills, it's true, but I continued to cook clean and wash their clothes as if I were their maid. Sarah had a habit of leaving her things scattered all over the house, marking her territory. Her creams on my vanity, her magazines on my coffee table, her clothes in my washing machine at any hour of the day or night. But what hurt me the most was seeing how David had changed. The affectionate boy who hugged me every night before bed had turned into a stranger who barely spoke to me. When I tried to talk to him about our memories, about his childhood, about his father, he answered me in monosyllables while staring at his phone. "Yes, Mom." "No, Mom." "We'll talk later, Mom." But later never came. And Sarah, my dear daughter-in-law, had started making increasingly sharp comments. "Olivia, don't you think this house is too big for one person? Olivia, my grandmother moved into a nursing home and she's happy. She has company all the time. Olivia, at your age, you should be thinking about simplifying your life." Now, sitting on my bed at 3 a.m, I understood that all those comments had not been casual. They had been part of a carefully orchestrated plan to make me feel like a burden, like someone who was in the way in her own home. I got up and walked to the window. The street was silent, lit only by a streetlight that flickered occasionally. Out there was the same neighborhood where I had raised my children, where I had built my life with Mark, where every neighbor knew and respected me. But inside this house I had been turned into a stranger. I thought about my other 2 children, Laura and Daniel, who lived in other cities. They called me occasionally, sent me money on my birthday, visited me at Christmas. But David had always been my favorite, my baby, my greatest pride. And now that same son was kicking me out of my own home with the coldness of someone discarding old furniture. The pain in my chest intensified, but it was no longer just sadness. It was something more dangerous. Something growing slowly inside me like a seed planted in fertile soil. It was the realization that I had dedicated my entire life to raising a stranger, to sacrificing myself for someone who saw me as an obstacle to his happiness. But it was also something else, something I hadn't felt in years. It was fury, a quiet, controlled, intelligent fury, the fury of a woman finally waking up from a dream that had lasted far too long. David and Sarah thought they knew Olivia, the submissive widow, the self-sacrificing mother, the old lady who settled for whatever crumbs of affection they gave her. But they were wrong. They had only seen one part of me, the part I had chosen to show them for years because I loved them. They didn't know the Olivia who had built a life from nothing. They didn't know the woman who had navigated decades of difficulties without ever giving up. They didn't know the widow who had learned to be strong because she had no other choice. And they definitely didn't know the mother who, when she feels betrayed by the son she gave everything to, can become the most dangerous enemy they have ever faced in their comfortable, privileged lives. As the dawn began to filter through my window, I made a decision that would change everything forever. I was no longer going to be the victim of this story. It was time to remind everyone who Olivia really was. The next day, David entered my room with a smile I hadn't seen in years. He was carrying a tray with coffee and toast, and for a moment, my heart quickened, thinking that maybe he had reflected on what happened last night. Maybe my son had come back. "Good morning, Mom," he said, with that sweet voice he used as a child when he had done something mischievous. "I brought you breakfast in bed." "I thought we could talk peacefully, you and I like before." I sat up slowly in bed, observing every detail of his behavior. His eyes avoided mine for more than a second at a time. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he placed the tray on my legs. And that smile I knew so well, was the same one he put on when he asked me for money for his teenage shenanigans. "Thank you, son," I said, keeping my voice calm, even though something inside me was screaming to be careful. "That's very thoughtful of you." David sat on the edge of my bed in the exact same spot where he used to sit when he had nightmares and came looking for comfort in my arms. But now his presence felt different, calculated, as if every gesture had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. "Mom, about last night," he began, running his hand through his hair as he always did when he was nervous. "I think Sarah and I were a little hard on you. It wasn't our intention to hurt you." I took a sip of the coffee. It was perfect, exactly how I liked it, with 1 teaspoon of sugar and a splash of milk. David remembered these details, and that made everything even more painful. "It wasn't your intention," I repeated slowly, savoring each word. "Then what was your intention, David?" He shifted uncomfortably on the bed, and I could see his forehead starting to moisten with small drops of sweat, even though the morning was cool. "You see, Mom, Sarah, and I have been thinking a lot about your future, about your well-being. You're 71 years old now, and managing such a big house, the bills, the expenses, all of that must be very stressful for you." There it was. I could see where the conversation was going, like a train slowly approaching on the tracks. But I decided to let him continue, to see how far he was willing to go with his act. "Go on," I said, cutting a piece of toast with the same precision I had used to cut thousands of breakfasts for him during his childhood. "Well, we were researching, and there are some very nice places. Very modern, specialized for people your age. Places where you'd have company all the time, where you wouldn't have to worry about anything, where you could do activities with people of your generation." My hand stopped midway to my mouth. "Places specialized for people my age." "Yes, Mom. Really elegant retirement communities, with beautiful gardens, with specialized nurses, with nursing homes," I interrupted, and my voice sounded colder than I had intended. David turned red, just like he did as a child, when I caught him in a lie. "No, Mom, they're not nursing homes. They're like residential complexes for seniors, very different from what you're thinking." I placed the coffee cup back on the tray, carefully trying to control the shaking in my hands. It wasn't fear I felt. It was an explosive mix of disappointment and rage growing in my stomach like a slow-burning fire. "And I suppose you've already found the perfect place for me," I said, looking him directly in the eyes for the first time in the conversation. "Well, yes, actually," he stammered. "There's one on the outskirts of the city that's beautiful. It has a really long waiting list, but Sarah knows someone who works there and could help us get you a spot." "How convenient," I murmured, feeling every piece of the puzzle start to fit into place. "And when were you planning to tell me about this wonderful plan?" "Mom, it's not a plan," David said, getting up from the bed and starting to pace back and forth just as he did when he was desperate. "It's a proposal for your own good. Think about it. No more worries about bills, no more loneliness, no more responsibilities. You could relax, enjoy your final years in peace." "My final years," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of those words. "How thoughtful of you to think about my final years." "I didn't mean it like that." He hurried to clarify, but the damage was already done. His true intentions had come to light like dirty water from a broken pipe. "And what would happen to this house while I'm enjoying my final years in that pretty residence?" David stopped in his tracks, as if he had walked straight into an invisible wall. His eyes darted back and forth, searching for an answer that sounded convincing. "Well, Mom, the house can't stay empty. It would be a waste and also dangerous. Thieves always look for abandoned houses." "Of course," I nodded slowly. "So you two would take care of it?" "Exactly," he said, and I could see the relief on his face, thinking I was accepting his plan. We would stay here to keep it in good condition, so that so that it's always ready for anything you need. The lie was so elaborate, so carefully constructed, I could almost admire the creativity behind it. But what hurt most wasn't the lie itself. It was the ease with which it came from my own son's mouth. "And the expenses for the residence?" I asked, feigning an innocence I was far from feeling. "Don't worry about that, Mom. I'll take care of everything. We can use the savings you have in the bank. And if it's not enough, we could consider mortgaging the house to cover the costs." There it was, the whole truth naked and merciless as a slap in the face. They didn't just want to kick me out of my house. They wanted me to pay for my own banishment. They wanted me to finance my own disappearance from their lives. "Mortgage the house," I repeated, and this time I couldn't hide the venom in my voice. "Only if it's necessary, Mom. And it would be temporary just until I can stabilize my income better." I stayed silent for several minutes, observing this 45-year-old man who had come from my womb, whom I had raised with all my love, whom I had taught the difference between right and wrong, or so I thought. "You know what, David?" I said finally with a smile that surprised even me with how calm it sounded. "You're right. At my age, managing all this is very complicated." His eyes lit up like a child's on Christmas. "Really, Mom, you're considering the idea." "I'm considering many things," I replied, taking another sip of my coffee. "Give me a few days to think it over, okay? A decision this important can't be made lightly." David leaned in and gave me a kiss on the forehead, the same kiss he had given me thousands of times during his childhood. But now it felt like the kiss of Judas, cold and treacherous. "Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need. But remember, the sooner we act, the better options we'll have to get you a really good spot." When he left my room, I could hear his hurried steps going down the stairs, and then whispering voices in the living room. David and Sarah were celebrating their premature victory, convinced that the old fool had fallen into their perfect trap. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, my motherly love for stupidity, my age for inability. For 71 years, I had learned that the most dangerous enemies are those who underestimate their opponent. And David and Sarah had just underestimated me in the most spectacular way possible. The next 3 days were a perfect play where we all performed our roles with dedication. David and Sarah acted as the loving children concerned for my well-being, while I played the confused old woman seriously considering their generous proposal. "How did you sleep, Mom?" David would ask me each morning with a smile I now recognized as completely fake. "Have you thought any more about what we talked about? I'm still reflecting, son," I would reply, while inside every fiber of my being prepared for what was to come. It's a very big decision at my age. Sarah had intensified her campaign of venomous comments disguised as motherly concern. "Olivia, I saw you struggling to open the jam jar yesterday. At your age, those simple things become very difficult." "Olivia, don't you feel lonely in this big house when we're at work?" "Olivia, my aunt was in a residence and she said it was like living in a 5-star hotel." But what they didn't notice was that I had begun my own silent investigation. While they thought I was spending my afternoons watching TV or sleeping, I was busy with much more important tasks. On the second day when they went out to lunch together, I took the opportunity to carefully review all the papers David kept in his briefcase. It wasn't hard to find what I was looking for. My son had never been very careful with his important things, a flaw I had tried to correct during his childhood, without much success. Between overdue bills and bank statements, I found something that chilled my blood, a colorful brochure for the retirement community they had so generously recommended. But it wasn't just any brochure. It had notes in the margins in Sarah's handwriting, price calculations, dates marked with red circles. Basic package $3,500 monthly. Premium package $5,200 monthly. Initial deposit $15,000. And below in my daughter-in-law's clear handwriting, with the house mortgage, this covers 8 to 10 years easy. 8 to 10 years. They had calculated how long they expected me to live, as if I were an investment with an expiration date. They had planned my death with the same coldness one plans a vacation. But what hit me hardest was a loose sheet with a real estate agency's letterhead. It was an unofficial appraisal of my house. $450,000, estimated quick sale price in the current market. At the bottom, someone had written by hand, enough for the down payment on the luxury condo downtown and residence expenses for several years. Everything was planned down to the last detail. They didn't just want to kick me out of my house. They had already decided where they were going to live with the money from my estate. They had even chosen the neighborhood, the most exclusive area of the city where the truly wealthy lived. I photographed every document with the smartphone Laura had given me last year, the phone David and Sarah thought I barely knew how to use. How wrong they were. At 71, I had learned that adapting was a matter of survival, not age. On the third day, I did something I hadn't done in months. I left the house without telling them where I was going. When David asked, I simply told him I needed to take a walk to clear my head about his proposal. I walked through the neighborhood where I had lived for 30 years, greeting neighbors who had known me since David was a child. Mrs. Carmen, who sold fruit on the corner, asked how my son was doing. "Very well," I replied, "taking good care of me." I passed by Mrs. Helen's house, my lifelong neighbor, who was watering her plants in the front yard. We started chatting about trivial things, but I had a specific purpose for this conversation. "Tell me, Helen, what would you do if your children told you to go live in a nursing home?" She fell silent for a moment, the hose still in her hand. "Oh, Olivia, why do you ask me that? Don't tell me David." No. I hurried to clarify. "It's just a hypothetical question. A friend of mine is in that situation and asked for my advice." Helen dropped the hose on the ground and came closer to the fence that separated our houses. "Look, Olivia, I have 3 children and none of them would dare suggest something like that. But if they did, I would remind them that you don't raise children just so they can abandon you when you're no longer useful." Her words stuck in my chest like pins. "And if they insisted, I would show them who really holds the power in this relationship. Children sometimes forget that everything they have they owe to their parents. A good reminder never hurts." That afternoon, when I returned home, David and Sarah were waiting for me in the living room with faces of concern that would have won an Oscar for Best Acting. "Mom, where were you?" David asked, jumping up from the sofa, as if he had been desperate. "We looked all over the house for you." "I went for a walk," I replied simply. "To think about your proposal." "And what did you decide?" Sarah asked, and I could see the real anxiety in her eyes. It wasn't concern for my well-being. It was anxiety to know if their plan was going to work. "I've decided that you're right," I said, and I saw them glance at each other with a triumphant smile they tried to hide. "This house is too big for me, and you are too young to be burdened with the responsibility of caring for an old woman like me." "You're not a burden, Mom," David lied, coming over to give me a hug that felt like the embrace of a snake. "Of course I am." I insisted, watching them look at each other again this time with a satisfaction they couldn't completely conceal. "But before making any final decisions, I need to settle some pending matters. Bank papers, legal documents, that kind of thing you put off, and then it becomes a problem." "Of course, Mom," Sarah said with that honey-sweet voice that now made me nauseous. "Take all the time you need. In fact, David and I could help you with those errands if you want." No, I replied quickly. "They are very personal things, very boring for you. Besides, I need to do it myself for my own peace of mind." That night, while they quietly celebrated their victory in the kitchen, I stayed in my room making plans that neither of them could imagine. They had made the mistake of underestimating a woman who had survived 71 years of life, 30 years of marriage, 20 years of widowhood, and decades of hard work. But above all, they had underestimated the power of a betrayed mother who had finally decided it was time to fight back. The next day, the real war would begin, and they wouldn't even know it had started until it was too late to surrender. On Friday morning, I left the house telling David I was going to the bank to review some documents. I wasn't lying completely, but I wasn't telling them the whole truth either. I had a very important appointment that I had been postponing for years, an appointment that would change everything forever. The law firm of Glass & Associates was located downtown in a 3-story building I had watched being built when I was young. I climbed the stairs slowly, not because of my age, but because each step brought me closer to a decision there was no turning back from. "Mrs. Mendez," the secretary greeted me with a professional smile. "Mr. Daniel is waiting for you." Daniel Glass had been a college classmate of David's, but he had also been something more important. He had been the neighborhood kid whom I fed for 2 years when his mother worked double shifts at the textile factory. Many afternoons he would come to my house hungry and with no money for dinner, and I never closed my door to him. "Olivia," he said, standing up from his desk with that warm smile that had characterized him since childhood. "I can't tell you how good it is to see you. I haven't heard from you in years." "Daniel, my boy," I replied, feeling for the first time in days that someone was looking at me with genuine affection. "You look great. Your mother would be so proud to see you as a professional." We hugged, like the family we had been during his difficult childhood. He had grown up without a father, with a mother who worked day and night to support him, and many times my home had been his refuge when the world became too hard for an 8-year-old boy. "Tell me, Olivia, how can I help you?" he asked as we sat in his elegant office, surrounded by law books and framed diplomas. "Daniel, I need your help with something very delicate." I began choosing my words carefully. "But first, I need to tell you what's happening." For the next hour, I told him everything. I showed him the photographs of the documents I had found in David's briefcase. I described the conversations. I explained the plan they had designed to get rid of me. Daniel listened in silence, but I could see his expression harden with every detail. "I can't believe it," he murmured when I finished my story. "David was my friend. We studied together, shared so much. And you, Olivia, you were like a second mother to me." "Children aren't always what we hope they'll be," I said with a sadness I had learned to carry like a stone in my chest. "But now I need your professional help, not your personal one." Daniel sat up straight in his chair, transforming from a childhood friend to a specialized lawyer. "Tell me exactly what you need." "I need to protect my assets," I said with a clarity that surprised me, "and I need to do it in a way that they cannot stop, change, or contest." "Are you thinking about a will?" "I'm thinking of something more immediate," I replied, pulling a folder from my bag that I had prepared during the night. "I want to sell my house." Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of my decision. "Olivia, selling a house is a huge decision. Are you sure this is what you want to do?" "Completely sure," I replied without hesitating. "But I need to do it fast before they suspect anything." "And what do you plan to do after?" "Afterward, I'm going to disappear from their lives forever," I said, and for the first time in weeks, I felt truly at peace. "I'm going to buy a small apartment in another part of the city, live my last years as I want to live them, and I'm going to make it very clear to them that their plan didn't work." Daniel took some notes in his legal pad, asking technical questions about the property documentation, my debts, the legal aspects of the sale. It was clear he had inherited his mother's intelligence and cultivated it through years of study. "I have a contact at a very reliable real estate agency," he said after reviewing all the papers. "They can do a professional appraisal on Monday and have a serious offer in less than a week. The market is very good for sellers right now." "Perfect," I replied. "And what about the legal aspects? Can David stop the sale in any way?" "No. If you are the sole registered owner, he cannot," Daniel assured me after reviewing the deeds. "And according to these documents, you are indeed the sole owner. David has no legal right to the property until you pass away, and only if your will states so." "Speaking of the will," I began, but Daniel interrupted me with a smile I recognized from his mischievous childhood years. "Let me guess, you want to make some changes there too." "Some changes," I confirmed, returning his smile for the first time in days. We spent the next 2 hours designing a legal strategy that was perfect in its simplicity and devastating in its consequences. Daniel knew all the technical aspects, but I knew David and Sarah better than anyone. Together we created a plan that neither of them could stop once it was set in motion. "Olivia," Daniel said when we finished, "are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once we start, there's no turning back." "Daniel, my boy," I replied, feeling stronger than I had felt in years. "They already made their decision about me. Now it's my turn to make decisions about them." "And doesn't it make you sad? At the end of the day, David is still your son." I thought about his question for several minutes. It was a fair question, one that deserved an honest answer. "It makes me very sad," I finally admitted. "But I can't keep being a victim of someone who claims to love me while planning to get rid of me. At my age, I don't have time to keep waiting for David to become the son I hoped he would be." When I left Daniel's office that afternoon, I walked through the downtown streets feeling different. I was no longer the confused victim who had entered the building 3 hours earlier. I was a woman with a plan, with allies, with the power to change her own story. That evening when I got home, David and Sarah greeted me with those fake smiles I knew so well. "How did it go at the bank, Mom?" David asked me with that acted concern he had perfected over the last few days. "Very well, son," I replied with complete calm. "Very, very well." What they didn't know was that in less than 72 hours, their comfortable lives and their perfect plans were going to collapse like a house of cards in a storm. And by the time they realized what had happened, I would be far beyond their reach. The war had officially begun, but they still thought they were winning. On Monday morning, I feigned a headache to stay in bed while David and Sarah left for work. As soon as I heard their car engine fade away, I got up with an energy I hadn't felt in months. I had exactly 8 hours to execute the first phase of my plan. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. It was Monica, the real estate agent Daniel had recommended. A woman in her 50s, elegant but professional, who inspired immediate confidence. "Mrs. Mendez, what a pleasure to meet you," she said with a genuine smile. "Daniel told me a bit about your situation. Let me assure you, we will handle everything with the utmost discretion." For the next 2 hours, Monica toured every corner of my house with an expert eye, taking photographs, measuring spaces, evaluating every detail. I followed her like a shadow, watching her see my home with the eyes of a business rather than the eyes of memory. "It's an excellent property," she said when we finished the tour. "The location is perfect, the construction is in very good condition, and the size is ideal for young families. In the current market, I estimate we can get between $480,000 and $520,000. More than David and Sarah had calculated in their amateur appraisal. Much more. "And how quickly could we close the sale?" I asked, although I already knew the answer because Daniel and I had discussed all the details. "If we find the right buyer who has pre-approved financing, we could close in 10 business days," Monica replied. "I have 3 clients who have been looking for exactly this type of property in this area." Perfect. Everything was going exactly as planned. After Monica left, I made the second call on my list. It was a number I had kept in my address book for years, but had never used. A moving company specializing in fast, discreet services. "Good morning. You've reached Trevino Movers. How can we help you? I need to schedule a move for this Friday," I told them with a firmness that surprised me. "Everything needs to be packed and moved in less than 4 hours." "What type of property, ma'am?" "A 3-bedroom house, but I only need my personal belongings moved. Clothes, photographs, important documents, and some specific furniture I will point out." We scheduled the appointment for 10 in the morning on Friday, when David and Sarah would be at their jobs, suspecting nothing. My third call was the most painful, but also the most necessary. I dialed the number for Laura, my daughter, who lived in Chicago. "Mom, what a surprise," she answered with that warm voice that reminded me why Laura had always been different from David. "How are you? Is everything okay?" "Honey, I need to tell you something very important," I said, and for the next 30 minutes I explained the whole situation. Laura listened in silence, but I could hear her breathing quicken when I told her about David and Sarah's plans. "I can't believe it," she murmured when I finished. "Mom, why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because I wanted to be sure of my decisions before involving anyone else," I replied. "But now I need you to know. I'm going to sell the house and I'm going to move." "Where, Mom?" "To a small apartment I've already found near downtown. 2 bedrooms, a perfect little office for my things, and most importantly, it will be in my name only." Laura was quiet for a moment. "Mom, are you sure you want to do this? Maybe we could talk to David, explain—" "No, honey," I interrupted her gently but firmly. "There's nothing left to explain. David already made his decision about me, and now I'm making my decision about him." That afternoon, while waiting for David and Sarah to return from work, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through and organized all my important belongings. In cardboard boxes I had bought in secret, I began to separate what truly mattered to me from what just took up space. I found love letters Mark had written to me during our courtship, photographs of my children when they were little and looked at me as if I were the most important person in the world, diplomas from courses I had taken over the years, handwritten recipes from my mother who had passed away 15 years ago. Each object told me a story, but not all those stories caused me pain anymore. Some reminded me of who I was before I became just David's mother, before I defined my worth by what I could give to others. I also found something I had forgotten I had, a savings passbook from a different bank than the one David knew about. It was an account I had opened in secret 10 years ago, where I had been putting away small amounts for years. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was mine, completely mine, and no one else knew it existed. When David and Sarah arrived that night, they found me in the living room watching television, seemingly relaxed and resigned to my fate. They had no idea I had spent the day organizing my independence. "How are you feeling, Mom?" David asked, giving me a kiss on the forehead that now felt like ice. "Better," I replied with a smile I had practiced in the mirror. "I think I'm starting to accept that you're right about my future." Sarah approached with that expression of false concern I knew so well. "Have you thought more about the residence we showed you I called today, and they still have availability, but not for long?" "Yes, I've been thinking," I said, looking them both directly in the eyes. "In fact, I think it's time for me to start getting my affairs in order so I can make the right decision." "What kind of affairs?" David asked, and I could detect a note of anxiety in his voice. "Boring things," I replied with a casual wave. "Bank papers, reviewing documents. The kinds of things a woman my age has to have in order before making big changes." That night, while they slept soundly believing they had won, I lay awake planning every detail of the coming days. On my nightstand, I had a handwritten list of all the tasks I had to complete before Friday. Wednesday, sign the sales contract. Thursday, sign the lease for the new apartment. Friday, move out and hand over the keys. But there was something else on that list. Something David and Sarah couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. Friday night, deliver the explanatory letters. Because I wasn't planning on disappearing silently like a coward, I intended to make it very clear exactly what had happened, why it had happened, and what the consequences of underestimating me were going to be. At 71, I had learned that the most powerful revenge isn't the one that screams, but the one that is executed in silence with precision and with no possibility of defense. Thursday night would be the last time I slept in this house. Friday morning would be the last time I woke up as the victim of this story. Friday night, David and Sarah would find out who Olivia really was. On Friday morning, I woke up at 5:30, 2 hours before David and Sarah got up for work. I got dressed in my best clothes, combed my hair carefully, and ate breakfast in silence as I listened to their lazy footsteps upstairs. It was my last breakfast in this house, but they didn't know it. "Good morning, Mom," David said when he came down to the kitchen, still in his pajamas, and with that sleepy face I had seen thousands of times during his childhood. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I replied, which was completely true. I was thinking all night about what we talked about. Sarah appeared a few minutes later, already dressed for work, in that artificial elegance she had perfected since marrying my son. She poured herself coffee in the mug I had bought for her when she first came to my house, believing she would be a loving daughter-in-law. "And what did you decide, Olivia?" she asked with that fake smile that now made me physically ill. "I've decided that you're right," I told them, keeping my voice calm while inside my heart was beating like a war drum. "I'm going to go to the residence, but I need a few more days to finish getting my things in order." David and Sarah looked at each other with such obvious satisfaction that I had to clench my fists under the table to stop myself from screaming the truth at them right then. "Of course, Mom," David said, coming over to give me a hug that felt like a stranger's embrace. "Take all the time you need." At 8:30, they left together in David's car, saying goodbye with kisses and smiles that I knew would be their last. When I heard the engine fade down the street, I walked to the window and watched them disappear around the corner. "Goodbye, David," I murmured into the empty air. "Goodbye, my son." At 10 o'clock sharp, the moving truck arrived, 3 efficient men who followed the instructions I had given them over the phone to the letter. Only my personal things. The clothes from my closet, the family photographs, my books, the sewing machine Mark had given me for our 10th anniversary, and the rocking chair where I had nursed all 3 of my children. "What about the large furniture, ma'am?" the crew leader asked. "The furniture stays," I replied with a firmness that surprised me. "Just take what's marked with this red tape." In 3.5 hours, my entire personal life was packed and loaded onto the truck. What remained in the house were just objects: sofas, a television, appliances, beds, things David and Sarah could use, until they realized they no longer had a house to use them in. By 2 in the afternoon, I was standing in the empty living room of my new life, a 2-bedroom apartment in a modern building 20 minutes from downtown, small, functional, and completely mine. The lease was signed for 3 years with an option to renew, and the deposit was paid with the money from my secret account. "Perfect," I murmured as the movers arranged my furniture in my new home. "Absolutely perfect." At 4 in the afternoon, I returned to my old house one last time. I needed to pick up the 2 letters I had written during the night and make sure everything was ready for the surprise David and Sarah would receive when they got home from work. The first letter was for David. I had handwritten it on elegant stationery with the careful cursive I had used for decades to write notes for his school lunches. "Dear David, by the time you read this, I will no longer be in this house. I moved out this morning to an apartment where I can live peacefully without asking anyone for permission to enter my own home. I also sold the house. The money from the sale is in a new account that only I control. I hope that retirement community you picked out for me has room for 2, because you are going to need to find a place to live very soon. The new owners take possession on Monday. Good luck in your new life. Sincerely, Olivia." The second letter was for Sarah, and it had been much easier to write because I didn't have to deal with the pain of motherly disappointment. "Dear Sarah, I assume by now you know I've moved and sold the house. I just wanted to assure you that I understood your plan to get rid of me perfectly. Unfortunately for you, you underestimated the wrong woman. I hope you find another place where you can eat for free and live rent-free. This house will no longer be an option. Cordially, Olivia." I left the letters on the dining room table along with the house keys and a copy of the signed sales contract. I also left the brochure for the retirement community I had found in David's briefcase, but with a sticky note on it that said, "In case you're interested for yourselves." At 5:30, I was sitting in the living room of my new apartment, drinking tea from a new cup I had bought that morning when my phone rang. It was David. "Hello, Mom, where are you? I got home and you're nowhere to be found." "I'm in my new house, David," I replied with a calm that filled me with pride. "Your new house? What are you talking about?" "Read the letter I left on the dining room table," I said. "Everything is explained in there." I could hear his hurried steps running through the house, then the sound of paper being torn as he ripped open the envelope. No, this can't be," he murmured, and I could picture his face full of shock as he read every word. "Yes, it can be, son," I replied, "and it already is." "Mom, you can't do this. This house belongs to the family. You can't sell it without consulting us. I can do whatever I want with my house, I said, emphasizing every word. Exactly like you thought you could do whatever you wanted with my life. This is crazy. You are going to cancel that sale right now. I'm not canceling anything, David. The contract is already signed, the money is already deposited in my account, and the new owners take possession on Monday. I heard Sarah's voice in the background, and then her hysterical screams as David explained what had happened. Get her address, Sarah shrieked. We'll go find her and force her to cancel everything. You don't know where I live, I told them over the phone, even though David had put it on speaker and they could both hear me. And you're not going to find out. Mom, please. David's voice cracked just like it did when he was a child and had done something wrong. We can talk. We can fix this. There's nothing to fix, son, I replied, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in years. You two already made your decision about my future. Now I've made my decision about yours. You can't just leave us homeless. I didn't leave you homeless, I clarified with a smile he couldn't see but could definitely hear in my voice. You made yourselves homeless when you decided to kick me out of mine. I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. For the next 3 hours, the doorbell of my new apartment rang, but I didn't answer. I received dozens of calls on the landline, but I didn't answer. I knew it was David and Sarah, desperate, furious, probably driving all over the city trying to find me. But they would never find me, because the Olivia they knew, the submissive mother and the silent victim, had died that morning when I closed the door of my old house for the last time. The woman who lived in this apartment now was someone completely different. She was a free woman, a woman who had reclaimed her power, a woman who had proven that at 71 she could still teach life lessons to those who dared to underestimate her. That night I slept better than I had slept in years. On Saturday morning I turned on my phone and found 37 missed calls, 23 voicemails, and 15 text messages, all from David and Sarah, each one more desperate than the last. Mom, please pick up. We need to talk urgently, said the first voicemail. Olivia, I know you're angry, but this can be fixed. Sarah's voice was heard in the 5th message, her sweet tone completely gone. Mom, this is insane. You can't just leave us on the street like this, David shouted in message number 15. By message 23, Sarah had completely lost her composure. You crazy old woman! You can't do this to us! We're going to sue you for abandonment! I poured my morning coffee and decided to call Daniel to tell him how everything had turned out. Olivia, how are you feeling? He asked with genuine concern. Everything went according to plan. Better than I expected, I replied, feeling a tranquility I hadn't experienced in years. Have you heard anything from them? Funnily enough, yes, he said with a smile in his tone. David called me last night completely hysterical. He demanded I give him your address and cancel the sale of the house. And what did you tell him? I explained very politely that you are my client, that everything we did was completely legal, and that he has no right over decisions that concern your assets exclusively. How did he react? He yelled at me for 10 minutes. He called me a traitor. Said how could I help his mother destroy the family. I reminded him that he and I were college buddies, but that you fed me when I was a hungry child. That afternoon, I decided to go for a walk in my new neighborhood. It was Saturday, and the streets were full of families, strolling couples holding hands, children playing in the nearby park. I felt like a tourist in my own city, free to go wherever I wanted, without having to explain myself to anyone. I was sitting on a park bench feeding pigeons with breadcrumbs I had brought from my apartment when I saw a familiar figure in the distance. It was Helen, my lifelong neighbor, walking towards me with a worried expression. Olivia, you gave me such a scare, she exclaimed when she recognized me. Your son David was at my house all morning asking if I knew where you were. And what did you tell him? That I knew nothing, of course, she replied, sitting next to me on the bench. But Olivia, what's going on? David looked desperate, and that wife of his wouldn't stop crying. What's going on, Helen, is that I finally took your advice, I told her with a smile that left her completely confused. My advice, the one you gave me the other day, I asked what you would do if your kids wanted to send you to a nursing home. You told me you'd remind them who really holds the power in the relationship. I told her the whole story while we fed the pigeons. Helen listened in silence, but I could see her expression change from surprise to shock, and finally to something that looked like admiration. "Good heavens, Olivia! I can't believe you did all that." "I can't believe it either," I admitted, "but it felt incredible. And now what's going to happen?" "Now they're going to have to learn to live without depending on me," I replied, with a tranquility that surprised even me. "They're going to have to find their own apartment, pay their own rent, fix their own financial problems." On Monday morning, from the window of my new apartment, I called Monica to confirm that the key handover had gone smoothly. "Everything's perfect, Olivia," she reported. "The new owners are delighted with the house. They mentioned that when they arrived, there were two people at the door, a man and a woman, who insisted there was a mistake that they lived there." "What happened?" "The new owners politely explained that they had bought the house legally and asked them to leave the property. At first they refused, but when they threatened to call the police, they finally left." That afternoon I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Mendez, this is attorney Mr. Munoz. I'm representing your son David in a legal matter." "What kind of legal matter?" I asked, although I already imagined the answer. "My client wants to contest the sale of the family home. He believes it was done without the consent of the legitimate heirs." "Mr. Munoz," I replied with a calm that filled me with satisfaction, "I suggest you review the legal aspects very carefully before proceeding. I was the sole registered owner of that house, and I have the absolute right to sell my property when and how I choose. But ma'am, the house has sentimental value for the family." "Sentimental value does not grant legal rights," I interrupted. "And I assure you I have the best possible legal advice. If your client wants to spend money on a process that has no chance of success, that is his decision." I hung up and immediately called Daniel to tell him about the legal threat. "Don't worry, Olivia," he reassured me. "It's an intimidation tactic. David has no legal claim to that property, and any competent lawyer would have explained that to him from day one." "Then why are they trying—" "Because they're desperate," Daniel replied. "And when people are desperate, they sometimes do irrational things." On Wednesday night, I was watching television when someone rang my apartment doorbell. I looked through the peephole and saw Laura, my daughter, standing in the hallway with a small suitcase. "Honey, what are you doing here?" I asked as I opened the door. "I flew in from Chicago because I needed to see you," she said, hugging me with the genuine affection I had missed so much. "Mom, you really did everything you told me on the phone." "Everything and more," I replied, feeling proud for the first time in years. "David called me crying," Laura told me as she sat on my new sofa. "He said you had gone crazy, that you had left them on the street without any explanation. And what did you tell him?" "I told him that if he had been a decent son, his mother wouldn't have had to take such drastic measures to defend herself." That night, while Laura slept in the second bedroom of my apartment, I lay awake reflecting on everything that had happened. In less than a week, I had completely destroyed the plans David and Sarah had made to get rid of me, and I had done it using nothing but my own determination and the help of people who truly appreciated me. But the most important thing was that I had regained something I had lost without even realizing it: my own identity. I was no longer just David's mother, the victim of circumstances, the old lady who settled for crumbs of respect. I was Olivia, a 71-year-old woman who had proven that it's never too late to fight back, to change the course of your own story, to remind the world that you deserve to be treated with dignity. David and Sarah had learned the most expensive lesson of their lives. Never underestimate the power of a woman who finally decides she will no longer be anyone's victim. 6 months after my great liberation, I woke up in my apartment feeling younger than I had felt in decades. I had developed a new routine that filled me with satisfaction. Breakfast on my small balcony, watching the sunrise, walking in the park every morning, taking painting classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays at the community center. Laura had visited me 3 more times from Chicago, and each time she saw me looking more radiant, more sure of myself. "Mom," she had said on her last visit, "I haven't seen you this happy since before Dad got sick." That particular morning, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in months, but I recognized it immediately. David. "Hello," I answered with a tranquility that surprised me. "Mom." His voice was broken, very different from the arrogant tone he had used with me during our last months together. Can we talk?" "We are talking," I replied simply. "No, Mom. In person. Please." I stayed silent for a moment, watching out my window as an elderly couple walked hand in hand down the street. "What do you want to talk about, David?" "To apologize," he said, and I could hear he was crying. "Mom, I messed up. I messed up terribly with you." "Where is Sarah?" I asked, although I already imagined the answer. "She's gone," he murmured. "She left 3 months ago. She met some guy with money and she left." Of course she had left. Sarah had never been in love with David. She had been in love with the financial security he represented. When that security disappeared, so did she. "And where are you living now?" "In a room I'm renting at my cousin's house," he confessed. "Mom, I lost my job 2 months ago. Sarah took our savings when she left. I have nothing." I felt a pang of maternal pain, but it was no longer the pain that would have destroyed me months ago. It was a pain filtered by the wisdom of having learned the difference between helping someone and allowing someone to abuse you. "And what do you want me to do about it?" I asked in a voice that held love but had lost all weakness. "I don't want you to do anything, Mom," he replied, and for the first time in years, I heard real sincerity in his voice. "I just want you to know, I realized what I lost. I want to apologize, not because I expect you to forgive me, but because I need you to know that I understand what I did to you." "What did you do to me, David?" "I betrayed you," he said without hesitating. "I betrayed the woman who gave me life, who sacrificed everything for me, who loved me unconditionally for 45 years, and I did it for money, for comfort, for convenience." The words I had waited months to hear had finally arrived. But they no longer brought me the satisfaction I had imagined. They only brought me a deep sadness for the lost time, for the wasted opportunities, for the damage that could never be completely undone. "And what do you expect now, son?" "I don't expect anything," he replied with an honesty I hadn't heard in his voice since he was a teenager. "I just wanted you to know that I wake up every day knowing I was the worst son a mother could have, and that, if you could ever forgive me, it would be more than I deserve." We were silent for several minutes. I could hear his ragged breathing, probably crying, while I processed emotions that had been locked away for months. "David," I said finally, "I forgive you." "Really?" His voice broke completely. "I forgive you because holding on to resentment would hurt me, not you. But forgiving you doesn't mean things will go back to the way they were. I understand, Mom." "No, I don't think you understand yet," I said with gentle firmness. "David, you are no longer my little boy who needs Mommy to rescue him from his mistakes. You are an adult man who made adult decisions, and you have to live with the adult consequences." "I know. If you want to rebuild a relationship with me, it's going to be a completely new relationship, based on mutual respect, not on financial or emotional dependency." "Does that mean we could try?" "It means that if you have really changed, if you have really learned from what happened, maybe in the future we can have a relationship as two adults who respect each other." We agreed to meet the following Saturday at a cafe downtown, Neutral Ground, where we could talk like two people who know each other but are starting over. When I hung up the phone, I sat in my favorite armchair, reflecting on the extraordinary journey I had been on these last few months. I had gone from being a silent victim to an empowered woman who had taken back full control of her life. My apartment was small, but it was mine. My money was limited, but it was mine. My decisions were completely my own. And for the first time in decades, I woke up every morning excited about the possibilities the day might bring. That afternoon, I went for a walk downtown, something I hadn't done in years. I stopped at a bookstore and bought 3 books I had wanted to read for a long time. I went into a coffee shop and ordered an expensive coffee that I sipped slowly while watching people pass by on the street. There was a flower shop on the corner, and on impulse, I bought a bouquet of flowers for my apartment. Not because it was a special occasion, but because I wanted flowers, and I could buy myself flowers. When I got back to my building, the doorman greeted me with that genuine smile I had learned to value. "Good afternoon, Olivia. How are you today?" "Very well, Don," I replied, feeling that those words were completely true. Very, very well. That night, as I arranged the flowers on my dining table, I reflected on something I had learned during these months of freedom. It is never too late to write a new chapter of your own story. For 70 years I had lived for others, for my husband, for my children, for the expectations of what a wife and mother should be. But at 71 I had discovered that I still had time to live for myself. David would have to prove with actions, not words, that he had truly changed. And if he did, maybe we could build something new, something better than what we had before. But if he didn't, I would be perfectly fine too, because I had learned the most valuable lesson of my life. My happiness didn't depend on anyone but myself. To all the women reading this story, especially those who feel trapped in situations where they are not valued or respected, I want to tell you something important. It is never too late to defend yourself. It is never too late to reclaim your power. It is never too late to remind the world that you deserve to be treated with dignity. If my story inspired you, if it gave you strength, if it reminded you of your own worth, then every difficult moment I lived was worth it. Leave me your comments, share your own stories, and always remember that you have more power than you think. With all my love, Olivia, a free 71-year-old woman who finally learned to live for herself.